Hello. Been a while, I know. How long has it been? Nearly 2 weeks now? It's been since like the 11th or something, I don't know. I completely forget. Either way, I'm back. It's a lovely day, I thought. May as well. I don't really know what to talk about. I don't really have anything, so just had to pick up the stick again. Maybe go over thrusts because I haven't really gone over that. And there is technique to thrusts, surprisingly. There's a bad way to do it, and there is a good way to do it, so I may as well go over that. How to start. There are two weapon types I think of when I think of thrusts. First one would be spear or polearm in general. Spear, you can either hold it like this, or more spaced out. You can hold it back here, which I wouldn't really do because it's all weight. You can hold it up if you want to shorten the spear or simulate a shortened spear. You can do it like that. You can also just one-handed if it allows so, which I find to be a bit uncomfortable with this length of spear, but it's possible. And the other is swords. Swords love thrusts, at least some swords. Most European swords like thrusts anyway. Japanese swords wouldn't be too focused on them, but they are meant to. There are stances, I'm pretty sure, that want thrusts. I don't know if it's a historical stance, I just see this a lot. This kind of stance with a Japanese sword, especially katana. I know this is something that gets done a lot. I have no idea if that's historical, if it's realistic, if it's being done by Japanese warriors, I don't know. But what I do know is European stuff. Hema. At least I think I do. What do you know? So, how do you thrust? Well, one thing that most people either forget or don't know is you don't just do that when you thrust. You step in and do that or any other kind of thrust at the same time. So a good thrust looks more like this, but there's nothing wrong with doing that. Just a quick, there's nothing wrong with that. Wrong. Not English. You can just do that all day long. Nothing wrong with it. But if you want a powerful thrust, good range, increases your range actually, you step into it and you thrust at the same time. However way you want to thrust, it doesn't matter. You always want to step into it if you want power. You can if you don't want to, because thrusts don't really need a lot of power, because usually with weapons that are designed to thrust, the tip of the weapon will be very small, smaller than any part of it, millimeters thin, like 1 millimeter to 3 maybe. It depends, but point is it gets very thin. Usually it's sharpened, so it's very easy to pierce. Anyway, if you are to thrust like this, usually you don't have to worry about the main problem with technique, because if you understand when to step in and when to not, if you know when to thrust and step back and when to not, at least with a spear and this stance, you know what to do. You don't really need to know anything else, because like this, my hands are locked into a position, a safe position, and there is nothing wrong with the stance. They're all pretty good aligned with my arms, so that when I hold it like this, I feel no problems. It's safe, it's tactical, it's historical. But if we switch over to a more sword stance, this would be key guard in German, I think. I really don't know what the German names are. I haven't really focused on that. I only know the techniques, not the names, but something like this. Something like this. Long point, for example. Like, for those stances, you tilt your wrist forward, and that's not a problem. But what is a problem is something called overextension of the wrist. And what that can be is a bit of this. This is a bad way to have your hand. I know for some sports, like maybe tennis, you probably already know that, because maybe, I don't know, I don't play tennis, I've never been taught by something like that, I've only learned through other means, I've never been trained in something before like that, but this kind of hold hurts, at least if you do it long enough. This hurts, and over time it will make you develop problems, mainly arthritis, which is very bad if you know what that is. I'm sure a grandparent or something, someone older in your family has it. It's very bad to have. Everyone who has it wishes they didn't have it, but it is able to be prolonged or like stopped entirely if you do it right with swords. What you want to do is just avoid overextension, but that's easier said than done. Sometimes you just overextend, you don't mean to, it happens. I was recording there, had to do a second take because I was interrupted, and before I did that, I thrusted forward, tried to anyway, and I overextended. It happens. Granted, I am bad at weapon-based combat because I have no formal training, I've never had a training partner. I don't really practice techniques often because this is what I'm working with. I have a stick, and I don't have a sword yet. Maybe when I get a sword, I'll practice the techniques a bit more, but at the moment, I don't, so what can you do? Anyway, overextension is very bad, obviously. I just said why. But how are you supposed to avoid that in a thrust? After all, when you thrust with a sword, someone who isn't trained or doesn't know what they're doing, they might just go, yeah. They might just do a bit of that. And it's pretty close to being good. This is long point, the stance name anyway. Don't know what it's called in German. I don't know what it's called in Spanish, whatever language, Italian. But this is close. That is not close. But it's a pretty simple fix. Instead of holding your hands out like this, you just flip them. My left hand has to be readjusted a tiny bit, so it's bent slightly at an angle, but not overextended. My right hand barely has to move at all, and that allows me to comfortably thrust without getting overextension. The angle is minimal. Now, if you do it wrong, it can be overextended, but usually it won't be a problem, because we just want to quick thrust. Yeah, it's probably not going to happen. If you step in, thrust with all your power into a brick wall, maybe it will happen a lot more often. I don't know, I don't plan to find out. I don't want to break this or damage this. It's just a stick, but it could be used for something. Either way. When you thrust with good form, you don't do this. You do that. Now the reason you would thrust like this, at least if it were to be good, is that it keeps the polearm, spear, sword, whatever, close to your center of mass, which is primarily where you want to protect with a sword. You want to protect this line, because that's where a lot of the important parts of your body are. Like, you don't want to get a slash down there, I can assure you of that. But you don't hold it like this. And although this is close, it kind of protects your center of mass, and it's the quickest line to the body, unless you hold it like that, but that's stupid. you can do it like this. And this pretty much makes the shortest line between your opponent and you, which is what you want in a thrust. A to B, it's fast. Much faster than a slash could be, that's for sure. At least it should be. A thrust is quick. So obviously, you want to make it as quick as possible. So holding it like this and just shooting it forward, that's fast. Because it's the shortest line to your opponent and you. But if it's going to hurt your arm or give you arthritis over time, I wouldn't want to do it. So what do? You just turn your arm, your wrist. And what this does is it keeps it center of mass without overextending, which means you still get the quickest line to your opponent, and you keep all the power, at least you should, you keep the speed, you keep all the benefits, and gain little punishment for it. There's little disincentive. Now, if you did it like me, because I am so good at this sport, I fucked it up there. I overextended. I don't know how well you can see it, but I overextended. And that hurts, by the way, to hold it like that. Now, you would trust, but there's a point where you should stop before you start overextending without even having to move your wrist. It's just your arm trying to extend as far as it can. So ideally, you'll just stop a bit earlier to stop yourself from getting overextended. There's no overextension here. I can do this all day. But yeah. So, is there anything else to go over with thrusts? Apart from stances and stuff? Maybe. Now, it's kind of hard to demonstrate with a stick because it's not a sword. Which means I'd have to make an example, but it would be a bit hard to understand without context. It's easier to explain with an actual sword, or something that at least looks like a sword. So if you'll bear with me, that would be nice. Because I don't think I can fish a stick out of the pile over there. It will simulate it. Anyway, this we'll have to do. With this, pretending it's a sword, there'd probably be a cross guard around here. That's the point where your hand can't go any further, and it's all blade up from there. Now, with swords, or any weapon in general, the further back you hold the weapon, the more wobbly it will be, because there's just more leverage against your hand. And the more leverage there is, the harder it is to control. Yes, it is. Should be. Again, I can move it much faster, move the point in much tighter circles, much easier. That's leverage for you. And with swords, you're holding it at the very end of a lever. The longer the sword, the more this impacts it. This helps a lot with the thrust, not the thrust, the cut, because the more leverage you have, the more it's going to hurt. Because more leverage equals more power, kind of more weight, but it's not weight, it's the balance. But with thrusts, because all the weight is down here on a sword, it means it's very capable of controlling the point. But some swords aren't like that. Some swords, they'll be past the guard, and the point of balance will be upwards a bit, usually on the ricasso, which is the blunt part of the sword. Sometimes it can be further, depends on the sword. Katana or any Japanese sword would usually have it a bit higher on the blade, because for cutting swords, you'd rather the point of balance be higher on the blade. For thrusting mainly, you want it lower on the blade. The lower it is, the more control you have. The higher it is, the more power you have. Kind of like how an axe works, but less to that degree. Either way. When you going? What point I'm making? Let me think. When you thrust with any weapon, the further back you are on the handle, the half, the hilt, whatever it is, the harder it is to make the point go exactly where you want it to. If I want to hit the lens of my camera, you can see I missed. You can't even see it. If I did that, hit directly, but I hit here. It's not easy to control the higher it is. But if I hold it up here, you can see it's much more closer to you. Well, at least it's more in your direction. And with a sword at least, doing this, if we pretend there's a cross guard or any guard here, I know it's scuffed. If I hold a sword like this, I am half swording. And half swording is a technique, it's real. You hold a sword by the blade. It sounds dangerous, it can be dangerous, and depending on what way you use it, it's common. Other times, it's very rare. For example, if we pretend the guard is here, this is the handle, and I hold a sword like this, so I'm holding it both hands on the blade, and I hit you with either the pommel, or the hilt, or the crossguard, that would be a mordhau, the murdered stroke, or just called inverting your sword. Flipping it upside down to hit it with the blunt end. Why would you do that? It sounds dumb, and it kind of is, but it has a purpose. Whether it's a good one or not, I don't know. I never did it in combat before, because I'm a 17-year-old in 2025, but it's almost like a mace on a really long handle. Now, that can generate a lot of power. It is meant for anti-armor use only. You don't want to hold a sword by its blade, especially with both hands, because if you fuck up, both your hands will get cut. At the worst, anyway. If you're lucky, you'll get only one cut. And if that happens, it can be bad, especially if it's two-handed weapon or sword. You don't want to have one hand just suddenly gone. That makes it much harder to slash, makes it much harder to thrust accurately. It's just a bad time. If you cut both your hands, you've lost basically, because you either can't hold a weapon, because you sliced your fingers too deeply, cut the muscles, ligaments in your palms, whatever. You don't want to cut your hands, obviously, especially if it's very deep into your fingers or whatever. But it had a place. Now, taking it back to thrusts, pretend the guard is here. I hold it by the blade and by the hilt. This gives me much less leverage to work against than if I was to hold it here. Here isn't bad, but this is easy. This is easy to manipulate. I have no trouble just thrusting more accurately. If I was to use it like this, I disproved myself, but I swear it's hard. It's much harder to hold it down here and be accurate with thrust than it is to be here. This gives me much more control, lets me be more accurate, just lets me be more precise. And that's exactly what you want if you're fighting an armored opponent, especially a late era knight. Because knight armor is pretty much impenetrable to a standard cut, but it isn't perfect against thrusts. Because usually there's gaps in armor. There is gaps in armor, usually around the shoulder, not the shoulder, the armpits, the groin. Sometimes the back can be exposed. Well, I mean the back, I mean like the back of the legs, back of arms. It can be exposed. But it depends what type of armor you're facing. If it's full coverage, then even the back of legs and back of arms, they can be covered up. But armpits, they can't really be covered by plate mail. The groin, any joints really cannot be covered because you need to move that part, you can cover it in non-flexible steel. So usually you'll have chainmail, maybe something under that like a gambeson, and that pretty much makes it impossible to cut. Even if someone lifted their arm up like this and you cut, you wouldn't be able to deal cut damage or whatever you want to call it. You wouldn't be able to penetrate due to chainmail. And pretty much every knight in full play will have chainmail because they're rich. If you can afford full play, you can afford chainmail, let alone a gambeson. But chainmail, as I went over in the mace review, is weak to thrusts because thrusts they either just the point just goes through the chainmail, the holes in the chainmail, or it just breaks the chainmail, depending on how big the point is, depending on how strongly constructed the chainmail is. There's a lot of factors, but pretty much the only way to defeat a knight in full plate with chainmail, you basically cannot cut. You have to either do blunt damage with the pommel, crossguard, whatever, or you have to thrust into the gaps. Now, if you're lucky, extremely lucky, I don't know how you did it, but there are holes in a helmet, especially the eye sockets. If you can get the point in there, you've won, because thrusts to the face are not pleasant. They're pretty fight-ending. Everything to the face is, but usually you'll be grappling the knight, you'll both tumble to the floor, and through there, you'd probably just pull out your dagger and finish the job. I don't have a dagger, obviously, but you'd pull out your dagger, or knife, whatever, you'd try and find a gap in the armor, and you just stab in there until they die. That's how it was. It was gruesome, but that's how it was. If you were lucky, and you didn't have to grapple, have to risk your life like that, you could either half sword, or just hold it normally, and thrust into the gaps of the armor without having to grapple. Now this would be harder to do, because the knight's got to fight back. They're going to be trying to deflect your thrusts. If you're using a weapon like a spear, or they're just very good at catching swords, they will catch your weapon as you thrust with it, and if they grab your weapon in a fight and you can't grab theirs, you've probably lost. It's very hard to come back from that. But yeah, that's how you would defeat a knight. Mostly through thrusts, because knights are pretty impenetrable if you forget about thrusts. And that's where half sword usually comes in, to get through the gaps of armor. Because the gaps of armor, they're not big, obviously. Especially armpit, because usually the steel will come up very high, and your arm will have steel over it too. There's not much of a gap, but if you can manage to get the point through here somehow, maybe at an angle, this kind of angle coming in, it could happen. Now, usually that would happen on the ground, but if you're on the ground, you're probably not doing this. You're probably just drawing your dagger. But in the end, the result was the same. You stab through the gaps in armor.